The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Now the Pharisees, they went off and they plotted how they might trap Jesus in his speech. They sent their disciples to Jesus along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are a truthful man and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. And you are not concerned about anybody's opinion, for you do not regard a person's status. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it lawful to pay taxes, the census tax, to Caesar or not? Jesus, knowing their malice, said to them, Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin. Show me the coin that pays the census tax. They handed him a Roman coin. He said to them, Whose image is this and whose inscription? They replied, Caesar's. And then he said to them, Then render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what belongs to God. The Gospel of the Lord. There are two things that may not be discussed at this year's Thanksgiving dinner or any Thanksgiving dinner, and one is religion and the other is politics. Yeah. Although this year you might be able to get away with it because of the COVID, you're probably going to have just the nuclear family and your crazy uncle won't be there, so maybe you can squeeze by. Mark Twain once put it this way. Mark Twain says, I am quite sure now that often, and very often, in matters concerning religion and politics, a man's reasoning powers are not that above a monkey's. And yet, today we got to talk about religion in politics, because the first reading and the gospel tells us two. And the question we've got to ask ourselves, because it's such a touchy question, is how is it relevant for us today, especially when we are in the process now of making a decision about our own politics and in our house of God, in the place where we worship. Do they fit together at all? Or are they completely separate? What does God say about religion and politics? And today we've got two very interesting people coming up to Jesus. You know, there's an old saying that says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right? There are two groups of people that are going to confront Jesus today. One are the Pharisees, and the other are the Herodians. Now, the Pharisees, we know about the Pharisees because Jesus is always going after the Pharisees. He calls them the whitened sepulchres. They look all fancy on the outside, and they do everything that's right, and they follow all the rules, and yet their heart is filled with anger and resentment and hatred and bitterness. And so Jesus is always calling them out. The other group are the Herodians. If the Pharisees are the basically conservative, follow the rule people, the Herodians are the secularists. They're Jews too, but like Herod, they're lousy Jews. They're going to do whatever Rome tells them to do. They're going to go along to get along. They're kind of the, if one is the conservative group, this is kind of the loosey-goosey liberal group. And yet both of these are going after Jesus. And the reason is because Jesus sees through them both. Jesus sees right through them, and he is not going to cut any slack for either one of them. So they're going to try to catch him. They're going to try to trap him in speech, St. Matthew tells us, and they've concocted this incredible little story. They begin by the wind-up. The wind-up is the butter-up. Teacher, we know that you're a man of God and you are a man of truth and that you don't go along to somebody's status and you're not a respecter of persons. So tell us, the wind-up, the pitch. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? They're playing what's called gotcha. Yeah? It's the question that the lawyer asks the person on the stand, when did you stop beating your wife? Which means you're darned if you do and you're darned if you don't. You can't answer this question. They're going to get him one way or the other. Because if Jesus says, no, you can't pay tax to Caesar, well, the Herodians are going to say, my goodness, you're breaking the law. You can be flailed for that. You can be hung up for that. That's so wrong. And if he says, no, you should not pay the taxes, or the Herodians will say that, but he says, yeah, you should pay the taxes. Well, then the good Pharisees are going to say, no, you're breaking Judaic law. You can't do that. Well, he's going to have them break Judaic law. He's going to say, show me a coin. Jesus does not have the coin in his purse. It's their coin. So now I don't know if the Herodians gave him the coin or the Pharisees gave him the coin. Probably was the Pharisees. I think they had more money than the Herodians. They pulled their coin out and they gave him the coin. And Jesus is, I think he's exhausted. He's frustrated. He says, you hypocrites. Jesus hated hypocrisy. He really did. Say yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no. Anything else is from the evil one. Don't say yes when you mean no. Don't hide behind all kinds of righteousness. I want to see who you really are. Now, he doesn't hate hypocrites. And the reason for that is because if he did, we'd all be in trouble. You know? And I remember I was in the back of the church one day and a lady came up and she says, I'm not going to go to this church anymore. It's just filled with hypocrites. I said, sit down, lady. You'll be right at home. You know? Of course we are. All have fallen short of the grace of God, and we all play the games. Whether we play it on the left or we play it on the right, we still play the games. So he says, you hypocrites, you're trying to trip me up. Show me the coin. Whose image is on the coin? Well, it's Caesar's. And then he says the incredible, they're not going to catch Jesus. No one's going to catch Jesus. Then render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Render unto God the things that are God. What is Caesar's? What do we render unto Caesar? Well, Caesar has the power to tax. Caesar has the power to govern. Caesar is Congress. Caesar is the president. Caesar is the judicial. Caesar is our secular governing power. Even St. Paul says, pay attention to the governing power so there be some kind of right order in life. That's a good thing, you know. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. But render unto God what is God. Give to God what belongs to God. What belongs to God? Or rather, who belongs to God? Caesar belongs to God. So when all is said and done, we know who's calling the shots here. It ain't Caesar, it's God. It's God's world. And if something is happening in our world, as Mother Angelica used to say, God has two wills. One is an ordaining will. God would like to see the world unfold beautiful, that we live as brothers and sisters in peace and harmony with all the animals and all this. That's his ordaining will. But God also has a permitting will. And in God's permitting will, all kinds of ugliness and evil and sin resides. But God's still in charge. God owns Caesar, and God is in charge of the Congress and the judiciary and the presidency. And it's made perfectly clear in the first reading today. First reading is really interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this is from Isaiah. It's the middle of Isaiah, and Isaiah is talking about a guy named Cyrus. This is around 587. This is the time when the Babylonian captivity, remember the Jews were carted off to Babylon, and there they were enslaved, and Persia conquered Babylon, and Cyrus was the king of Persia. He is a non-believer, but he's been pretty decent to the Jews' agenda because he's going to let them go back to the Holy Land. He's going to let them go back to Jerusalem. He's even going to let them build the temple, and he may even throw in a couple of bucks to help them build the temple. And God is talking to Cyrus in the first reading today. And what's God saying to Cyrus? I anointed you. It's amazing that the word he uses is Mashiach in Hebrew, and that means the Messiah. I made you a Messiah, which means I'm working through you. But let me tell you something. You don't even know who I am. You don't know who I am, but I'm using you for my purposes. Now, we cannot figure out God's purposes in the here and now, in the moment in which we are living. We get this itty-bitty little moment in time, And right now we are in a moment in time. God's got this huge, huge picture that is 3.5 billion years old. And we have just arrived on the scene. And whatever dance Cyrus is dancing, God's pulling the strings. I gave you the power, and make no mistake about it, I am the God. You have nothing without me. What's the meaning here? The meaning here is that in the economy of God, nothing's wasted. Now, we can't stop God's action. God is going to redeem the world. Jesus promises that. But we don't know how he's going to do it. And one of the things he does sometimes is make us seem to go backwards before we can go forwards, to fall before we pick up. That's called the mysterium iniquitatum. It's the mystery of evil. And yet we better be reconciled to the fact that it's going to be around, that it's not going to work, for the simple reason that God is showing us what's the greatest evil that ever befell humankind. The killing of God. The killing of God. What's the greatest mercy that ever happened to the world? The killing of God. Through this incredible evil comes the redemption of the world. He is setting the pattern. He's in charge. Our job is to pay attention. Now, the question for us is, well, what does this have to do with today? That happened, over 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago with Cyrus. Well, what's that got to do with us today? Well, it's very interesting. We've got modern-day Pharisees and modern-day Herodians. The Pharisees were the ones to the right. As a matter of fact, if you watch evangelical Christian television programs, and I'm always channel surfing through all those programs, and I've been amazed lately because they've been saying, Cyrus is back. Cyrus has been reincarnated. And the sitting president is Cyrus. Look what he's done. Of course, a fundamentalist evangelical Protestant believes, or many of them believe, I shouldn't put them all in the same basket because nobody belongs all in the same basket. That's unfair. But many of them believe that Christ will not have the second coming until Jerusalem is restored. So that's why they were so thrilled when Cyrus, or the president, moved the capital from Tel Aviv into Jerusalem. It's starting to fulfill the prophecy. And it's called eisegesis. That's called eisegesis. Exegesis is taking stuff out of the scriptures. Eisegesis is putting stuff into the scriptures. So they're reading that into the scriptures. We don't like his personality, but look at the wonderful policies that he's done. He's got the power to do it. We don't like how he's doing it. We used to say in the old communist days that the end never justifies the means. But they seem to be saying, well, if the means are ugly, it's okay because the end is so very, very important. And we're seeing that right now with the whole confirmation that's going on. That's one side. There's another side that says, yeah, that's right. God is working in the world. But what's he doing? He's unmasking the evil in the world that we have not seen until now. And the question for us is, what are we going to do about it? This pandemic has shown us the incredible inequality between those who have and those who have not. The vast majority of those who are getting sick are on the bottom of the rung. We now find the racial inequality that has always been there from the time that this country was founded until now has come up, and it's screaming at us in our face. And we don't know if we want to look at it or not, but it's right there. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? California is on fire. The South is getting flooded. The world is changing before us. What are we going to do about it? And so in a way, all that's going on and all that's even going on in our political world right now is God's way of saying, you see all this ugliness in the world? Can you do something about it? Do not talk to me about family values if that's what's going on. Can you do something about the refugees who are not allowed in our country anymore? Can you do something about that? Well, that's Cyrus. So that's the Herodians' point of view, and then we've got the Pharisees' point of view. We've got both of these points of view. The question is, which one are we? The answer is both. All of the above. We've all got some Pharisee in us. We've all got some Herodian in us. We've all got some things in us that are not quite right. Does that mean that we just eschew the world? No, we've got to get involved in the world. We've got to get involved in the world. We have a moral obligation to be part of the system no matter how we see it. And we're going to see it from different angles. Every point of view is a view from a point. And depending on how we have grown up and who we listen to and what television programs we watch and what channels we watch, we're going to see it from all kinds of different perspectives. What I'm trying to say tonight is, over all of that, God knows what's going on. And we've got to trust that the divine presence is in the midst of everyone on the left and on the right. Not one group is all bad and the other group is all good, or the one group is all good and the other group is all bad. It's not true. It's not true. And so we've got to get involved, but we've got to get involved in the process. We have to have an informed conscience. And the best way to do that, I think one of the things that our bishops put out every 4 years is what's called faithful citizenship. And if you're going to find this beautiful statement of our bishops saying, here are the moral values, and your politics need to follow somewhere in those moral values. And of course, the sine qua non, the very first value, is right to life. But it's not the only value. Because they go on to say that we cannot only be a pro-birth church, we've got to be a pro-life church, which means, how are we going to take care of these children once they're born? Are we going to be responsible to make sure that they have health care, that they have food, that they have clothing? We cannot allow them simply to be born and then put them to the side because we've done our duty. No, we haven't. And so the question is, we've got to wrestle with all of this and then make our decision as to how we're going to move forward. We can't stop God's action. God is going to continue with redemption, but we can slow it down. We can really slow it down. Now, I don't know how things are going to turn out after the election is over, but what I do know is that God's in charge of it. Usually, something terrible happens before something good happens. Now, no one can tell you how to vote. I've heard some people have gotten up on the pulpit and say if you vote for a certain candidate or you don't vote for a certain candidate, that you can't be Catholic. It's not true. I'm sorry. It's not true. You vote your conscience. The informed conscience is the supreme court of the individual. As long as you've informed your conscience and wrestled with this and then vote your conscience, God's going to deal with however you vote. But you've got to vote. We've got to be involved. Because, like I said, we can't stop God. We can certainly slow him down. God's going to right straight with crooked lines. We are in all kinds of crooked lines. The world is a world of distress. The world is in traverse. We go forward, we go backward, we go up, we go down. But God keeps on moving us on. And it's sometimes darkest right before the dawn. And usually there's a crisis right before the Enlightenment. In 1942, Winston Churchill wrote this. In 1942, the war was raging. Hitler was going crazy. It looked like it was going to be curtains for England and for the Allies. And everybody was about to give up. And Churchill wrote this. He says, "This is not the end." What's going on in our pandemic right now, whatever going on in our politics right now, this is not the end. It is not the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. Now, if God is love, and love always conquers all, we're going to be just fine.